Hello, welcome back to Shocks Talks. We're trying it again with the back camera and a microphone this time. I hope it helps. Okay, we're going to do a little read along today. This is all about the white paper that I read. It's incredible. This is from the New Paradigm Institute, and I've linked it below for you, a link to their website and a link to this paper. It's 39 pages. The title is Disinformation, the U.S. Government's Suppression of Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena and Advanced Science. It's by Kevin Wright, the Press Relations Manager and Policy Liaison for New Paradigm Institute. And I learned a lot reading this. So we're going to kind of go through it. You can follow along if you want to click the link and open up a separate window with the paper. I'm just going to be reading some things I highlighted and giving my summaries of the parts that I'm not going to read out loud. So let's start with the sort of high level, what is this all about? This essay examines and critiques the systematic use of disinformation, secrecy, and legislative mechanisms by the United States government to suppress knowledge of the reality of non-human intelligence, NHI, unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, and certain advanced scientific research/innovation. Drawing on declassified documents, congressional investigations, news sources, and recent whistleblower testimony, this paper explores how executive branch entities have used narrative control, overclassification, and legislative instruments to purposely obstruct public understanding and scientific progress concerning UAP and certain advanced sciences. Historical case studies, including official UAP investigations, Project Stargate, MKUltra, COINTELPRO, Operation Mockingbird, are analyzed to illustrate a durable pattern of information suppression extending from the Cold War to the present. This paper further evaluates the role of Special Access Programs, SAPs, the UAP Security Classification Guide, and specific statutory frameworks such as the Atomic Energy Act and the Invention Secrecy Act to conceal potentially transformative technologies. Ultimately, the essay calls for urgent legislative and executive branch reforms to ensure transparency, restore public trust, and democratize access to paradigm-shifting scientific discoveries. So, what we're going to be going through are all of these different examples of how we got to where we are today, basically, and how there's a continuation of the same disinformation tactics. The very beginning is an executive summary, and this goes into a couple big names who have recently confirmed this UAP, the reality of UAP and NHI. So they mentioned David Grush, Carl Nell, who we haven't talked about on this channel a lot. This was at a conference in May 2024. This retired U.S. Army Colonel Carl Nell, a former member of the U.S. Department of Defense's Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Task Force, UAP Task Force, stated that there is zero doubt that non-human intelligence exists. David Grush, you probably remember, is the one who said that the government, and he did this under oath at a congressional hearing, he said the government is in present physical possession of non-human craft and biological evidence. Luella Zondo, a former leader of ATIP, this was the guy that came out and wrote the book Imminent. He quit his job because he was feeling like they weren't really doing things right, as usual. And he did state that non-human intelligence exists and their craft is not made by humans. And then Dr. Eric Davis, PhD, an astrophysicist. He was a consultant with the DoD's ATIP and UAP task force, and he informed members of Congress that the US government and aerospace defense contractors have retrieved UAP. So all of these people are saying the same thing. This stuff is real. It requires congressional oversight. No more time for pretending this isn't real. And they're all really credible, and they have all been vetted and backed by so many different people. And there's many more of these whistleblowers, scientists, and independent researchers who are saying the exact same thing, of course. So unlike misinformation caused by human error, this is straight from the paper, disinformation by the federal government is a deliberate and strategic distortion of facts, systematically deployed to manipulate public perception, conceal sensitive information, and often preserve the power of those with institutional control. So for all those people out there that say like, oh, you guys are just, there's no real evidence of this stuff. The reports have been released that say they looked for things and they didn't find anything. This is going to show you exactly why those reports were a lie and how they were carefully crafted to basically get you to think a certain way. So it's a really difficult thing because they've been extremely successful. So for the people out there who are highly skeptical, don't want to believe that any of this is true, read this paper. Read the whole thing. It didn't take me very long. It's like written like an academic paper. There's all of the different footnotes. You can go and see where all this declassified information comes from, and it's really important to take this seriously. So these are the things that they use: secrecy laws, narrative control, selective disclosure, media manipulation, and psychological operations, also known as PSYOPs. This has allowed the US government to not only hide the truth about NHI, UAP, and reverse engineering programs, but to discredit, stigmatize, and threaten those who attempt to expose these secrets. And then they're going to get into some really interesting examples. We're going to dive into MK Ultra, which is very real and a whole deep dive in and of itself, but unethical experiments on unsuspecting Americans were taking place with this MK Ultra program. COINTELPRO, targeting of constitutionally protected dissenters, and Operation Mockingbird's unlawful and unconstitutional infiltration and distortion of American news sources. And then they're also going to talk about Project Stargate and remote viewing. So let's go deeper in. Excessive classification is a tactic. So this whole need to know thing, keeping things where they want them and not in the places where they should be. So this is how they evade congressional oversight. And sometimes even the president doesn't get to know what's going on with this stuff. They talk about these different acts that were created way back in the day: the Atomic Energy Act of 1946 and the Invention Security Act of 1951 have long been misused to classify patents and scientific discoveries related to energy propulsion and aerospace technologies, some of which, if declassified, could potentially revolutionize entire industries. These laws, which originated at the start of the Cold War, ostensibly to protect genuine national security, like safeguard nuclear secrets from the Soviet Union, now stifle progress by serving as instruments of scientific suppression. So they're leaning into these old laws to say, again, you don't need to know. You don't need to know about all this new science. You don't need to know about these things that would completely upend the oil industry, for example. So thousands of patents remain under secrecy orders. Can you imagine? Thousands of these things, including inventions related to novel energy production, distribution, and propulsion systems. So this is suppression of science. Then they talk a little bit about what we can do. We're going to dive into these programs and then at the end get back into what can be done about all of this. But one of the things that they have introduced and was shot down was the UAPDA. So that was the amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, and we're going to get into the details of that at the end of this again. So this paper will examine the historical record of government disinformation campaigns, demonstrating how past efforts to suppress political dissent, control media narratives, and stifle scientific research provide a blueprint for understanding modern UAP secrecy. So again, we're going back and looking at the historical record, declassified real information of government disinformation campaigns. So the proof that this isn't a mistake, this is deliberate. We're going to look at some evidence, and there's much more. For a 39-page paper, this is actually extremely concise. They really hit the main points, and they don't give us a whole lot of fluff. So there's plenty more evidence to support this theory. They just hit on some really big, important examples. Establish clear parallels between past and present suppression efforts. So we're going to get to take a look at how the tactics that were used in these operations, COINTELPRO, MK Ultra, Operation Mockingbird, and the Project Stargate, are still in effect today when it comes to crash retrievals, UAP secrecy, NHI, hidden science. They're going to draw the parallels for us, and it's easy to see. And then this paper is going to advocate for urgent policy reforms to modernize secrecy laws, expand congressional oversight, and ensure that scientific progress serves the public rather than an entrenched national security state. So even if you don't listen to this whole episode, go click on the newparadigminstitute.org right now. You can join Citizens for Disclosure, or you can just join the newsletter. The newsletter is incredible, and they will often give you the opportunity to take action when that moment arises. So if there is a moment where they need everybody to talk to their senators, for example, they will provide you with the exact letter. They will locate your people for you. It's all just click, click, click. It's very easy. You don't even have to draft the letter. You can personalize it. But they make it so easy, and it doesn't cost anything. And they will keep you up to speed with everything that's happening. So their newsletter is basically, like, I would say it's essential for any of you who are very serious about making progress in this realm of disclosure. And it's going to be important as we continue to develop technologically as a society. These programs and all of this secrecy has just snowballed. It's out of control, and it's really detrimental to humankind. They go into some of the old projects. I'm not going to dig too deep into this, but Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book. And basically, this is all about, and this started in 1947. So Project Sign started in 1947. It's like the original Arrow or ATIP, you know? So this is when the government says, we're going to do something about this. We're going to look into this. And then maybe they start with a degree of scientific seriousness. And then later the reports are destroyed, suppressing Project Sign's initial findings. And this set an early precedent for the deliberate containment of disruptive interpretations of UAP encounters. So it all started back in 1947. Then they created a new name for a similar type of project called Project Grudge. That was 1949. And this adopted a markedly more dismissive posture. So this was all about reducing public concern and debunking UAP reports. So they started to shift their tactics a little bit. Because, you know, there's always a mix of people that are involved in these programs. And at the end of this paper, they do make a point to say that, like, there are plenty of good people in government trying to do the right thing. And sometimes they're part of these projects and they try to look at the science, and then someone else comes in and says, no, we're not going to talk about all that. I'm going to destroy all this evidence. We're going to release a report telling the public that this is crazy and it was all weather balloons and swamp gas or whatever, you know. So it's a mixed bag. And towards the end, they say, we're not here to, like, prosecute everyone who tried. We just want to move forward. We're not even going to go back and try to, like, hold everybody accountable. Although there will be some people held accountable for certain things. But obviously they understand that, like, a lot of this, people are doing the best they can. Then that became Project Blue Book, which is the one you've probably heard about the most. And that was 1952. And there was, again, a little effort here to try to restore a measure of investigative rigor. And Blue Book did do some serious work categorizing UAP reports. They acknowledged a significant percentage of unexplained cases. However, as public interest in UAP surged following the 1952 Washington, D.C. sightings, pressure mounted to restore a narrative of dismissal. So this increasingly functioned as a public relations apparatus rather than a scientific investigation. Okay, so I'm just going to keep it moving. They talk a little bit more about the Robertson panel, the Condon report. These are all doing similar things. The overarching objective was to neutralize the UAP issue as a matter of public or scientific concern. Investigators were permitted only to the extent that they reinforced official skepticism. Findings that challenged the sanctioned narrative were suppressed, reframed, or discredited. This pattern of UAP management mirrors broader disinformation strategies observed in other classified programs. And now we're going to dig into those. They do mention here the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, that's AARO, and their 2024 UAP report, which basically mirrored what all of these things did. It was another chance for them to say, nothing here, don't worry about it. Just as you all suspect, there's nothing really going on with this, because they've gotten so many of us into that mindset for so long that it's easy to just say, yeah, there's nothing here, because people are used to that. It's been since the 40s, so this is like deeply ingrained in the collective psyche. They talk about how that report reveals striking continuities with prior governmental strategies of narrative management, selective disclosure, and institutional suppression. So it's a huge disappointment. And it's more than that. It's a big lie, and it's really, really bad. So as they go and diminish whatever findings these programs do talk about, or, for example, if they say like, well, there are some unexplainable things, they make sure to also tackle, the news stories in a way that kind of primes people to be skeptical. So they will go out and do these press releases or publish an op-ed. This Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, AARO's former director, published an op-ed in Scientific American that characterized theories of UAP of being non-human origin as speculative and conspiratorial, employing stigmatizing language such as space aliens to reinforce a dismissive tone. So they're very thoughtful about how they make this sound stupid and silly and crazy and conspiratorial. They're reinforcing that. And it's easy to reinforce because people are insecure about these things. Nobody wants to be stupid. Nobody wants to be a full-out conspiracy theorist and not be taken seriously. And so they keep a distance from this information because they want to be credible in their careers, or they just want to feel good about themselves. They don't want to be made fun of by their peers. And this playing into the human psychology has just been extremely effective. So much so that many people, like I said, are not even willing to begin to think about this stuff. But the deeper you dig, the more you learn, the more you realize, oh, we've all been had. This is where it's at. The real truth is deeply buried in all of this information that we're sifting through, and the cover story is the lie. So now now that we've seen how this all started with these different programs, another topic that they dig into is overclassification. So when too much information is obscured from the public, including historical records, technical data, and scientific findings, it breeds distrust, impedes informed civic participation, and paradoxically weakens national security by obstructing institutional learning and public scrutiny. So what they're saying, just to recap this, is like, when too much of this real information is obscured, because yes, some secrets must be kept, but when too much is kept from the public, and they're talking about like our own history, real records of real history, technical data, and scientific findings, this is what breeds distrust. And that's not a good thing. it actually stops us from participating because people don't want to be, oh, I'm that weirdo fighting for disclosure. It's never going to go anywhere. Like, it stops us from actually participating in the systems that we have, in our own legal systems and our own governmental systems, which are designed for us, the people. So they've caused us to stop even trying. And it actually weakens national security because they're obstructing institutional learning and public scrutiny of those learnings. We need to have more people looking at this science and this data. So this is an interesting part. So actually, the executive branch also has the power to classify entire areas of math and physics. So when people say hidden science, suppressed science, this is no joke. We do not know everything. We are given a limited amount of information when it comes to how far humankind has advanced scientifically, and that's flat out not fair. That is wrong. They are blocking our progress. We, the people, the normal people, we are not able to go past a certain point of understanding because they're keeping it classified. And in July 2024, the White House officials asserted that they were fully prepared to classify areas of artificial intelligence, AI, particularly math, in much the same way it did with nuclear physics, effectively halting advancements in any field deemed a threat to national security. Is it a threat to national security, or is it a threat to the powers that be? Because they discover these things and they have their own plan of how they want to use them, but they would be threatened if other people had access to the same information. It could disrupt their agenda. So now let's dig into MK Ultra. This is fascinating. So 1953 to 1973. MK Ultra was a covert CIA program launched in 1953. This was intended, the director was Sidney Gottlieb. This program was intended to investigate methods of psychological manipulation, behavioral control, and advanced interrogation techniques during the Cold War. Now, I'm going to tell you this right now. I was surprised to see MK Ultra in this paper because the way the media has portrayed MK Ultra, it almost makes you feel like it's fabricated, because what they do in these tactics is they mix fact and fiction and they seed it into the media and into movies and they make light of it. And they almost make you question, was that real or was that just a story that I saw in a movie? Well, it's real. This is declassified information. This program was real. And they were doing things during the Cold War to basically advance interrogation techniques. They ran this program for 2 decades, and it encompassed more than 140 sub-projects. Can you imagine? 140 little, what were the weird sub-projects that came out of this when they're trying to investigate methods of psychological manipulation, behavioral control, and advanced interrogation techniques? So part of what they were doing with MK Ultra was they were exploring the use of psychoactive substances, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, and memory manipulation. Experiments were frequently conducted on unwitting civilians, prisoners and military personnel, and psychiatric patients without informed consent, violating fundamental ethical and legal standards. Among the most notorious sub-projects was Operation Midnight Climax, in which LSD was administered without subjects' knowledge at a CIA-controlled location with behavioral responses covertly observed. So they secretly enticed people into, I think they were using some sex workers in this program to entice men into this like building that was being monitored. They didn't know they were being monitored, and they would secretly dose them with LSD and observe their behavior when people would find themselves basically tripping and they didn't know why. That's crazy. This should not be allowed. And the fact that they could go and take unwitting civilian citizens, regular people, but also prisoners, they're exploiting prisoners, they're exploiting psychiatric patients, and also military personnel. This is horrendous, and it's totally a human rights violation. So because of that, actually later on, this did get investigated. So there was this thing called the Church Committee, and it was named after Senator Frank Church. And it was officially known as the U.S. Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. So basically, someone catches wind of this craziness and says, you know what? This cannot fly. This cannot go on without some oversight. We're going to investigate. This happened in 1975, and this investigation revealed systematic misconduct, including illegal mind control experimentation and deliberate efforts to mislead oversight bodies. You get that? So deliberate efforts to mislead the people that are supposed to be keeping an eye on all of this. However, public disclosures strategically framed MKUltra as a misguided, just a couple crazy people got a little off the rails, but we, the CIA, would not normally do stuff like this. A misguided or ineffective endeavor that produced little actionable intelligence value. So, we didn't really, some crazy people tried a couple things with psychedelics back in the 70s, but they didn't really find anything. Bullshit. That is wrong. That is not true. They had 140 sub-programs. They weren't doing that for no reason. You think they didn't find anything? You think they're not still trying to manipulate people through whatever means they can figure out? You know? So this public statement, this PR campaign basically minimized the significance of this program, and it shielded the CIA from broader institutional accountability for human rights violations. So this is a clear example of disinformation techniques applied to protect sensitive research. First, secrecy and destruction of records. So they actually destroyed some of the records of this program, and that insulated it from external review. Then public minimization, recast serious ethical violations as minor misjudgments. So they spin it, it's a little PR spin. These were major ethical violations, but they're like, no, this was just a couple people going off the rails. Like, don't worry about it. That'll never happen again, And then the third part, discrediting of certain research areas. So trying to minimize these very important areas of research that should probably be conducted under some ethical supervision and with some kind of oversight, but consciousness manipulation. Maybe we shouldn't even be messing with that, but somebody was. And that's a serious area of research that we should know about so that we could protect ourselves from having our consciousness manipulated. And non-traditional interrogation methods, that's really messed up. God only knows what they were doing. And then it framed legitimate scientific inquiry as fringe or pseudoscientific. So anyone who really wanted to look into this stuff, it was like, that's pseudoscience. This is not real science. They keep the story of what real science is, and that little thing that they call real science is this tiny subset of all of what is being explored out there. Because, these people shouldn't know. It's, they're playing God. It's so horrendous. And they shaped the boundaries of acceptable public discourse concerning the capabilities and limits of psychological research. So again, just keeping us in our place. All right, so the MKUltra program was used as an example here because of its research of altered states of consciousness and perception. That parallels certain aspects of contemporary UAP studies where cognitive and perceptual anomalies, including memory disturbances, altered awareness, and neurological effects, are frequently reported in close encounter cases. Such phenomena have been documented in a Defense Intelligence Agency-sponsored study of biological effects associated with UAP encounters, and in independent research by Stanford professor Dr. Gary Nolan, who identified distinctive neurological changes among individuals reporting anomalous experiences. Go check out Dr. Gary Nolan. His work is pretty interesting, and Lou Elizondo talks about him in his book Imminent as well. So the disinformation techniques refined during MKUltra secrecy, strategic destruction of evidence, minimization of misconduct, and control over public narratives remain relevant to understanding how information about UAP, NHI, and advanced scientific research continues to be suppressed today. All right, the next one we're going to go into is COINTELPRO. This is 1956 to 1971. This is a counterintelligence program. This was FBI, MKUltra CIA, COINTELPRO FBI. This happened starting in 1956 under Director J. Edgar Hoover. And this was aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, and disrupting domestic political organizations perceived by Hoover and his ideological allies as threats to national security. So, although initially justified by its founders as a counter-subversion measure during the Cold War, COINTELPRO's operational scope quickly expanded to target civil rights organizations. So again, they're using the Cold War, now they say national security risk. They find an umbrella of like, this is our justification. And then they quickly spread out underneath that into like things that are more, they're not about protecting everybody. They're about protecting their interests. And right now their interest was grassroots organizations and anti-war groups. And they used illegal surveillance, psychological warfare, harassment, the fabrication of evidence, blackmail, and the manipulation of media narratives to discredit and neutralize perceived adversaries. Guess who these people were, these perceived adversaries? Martin Luther King Jr. was one of them, the Black Panthers, anti-Vietnam War activists. These are not bad guys. And these FBI programs, what they did, they employed forged letters, anonymous threats, and false media leaks to sow distrust within organizations, to create internal divisions and undermine public support for activist leaders. Undermine public support for activist leaders. So they were infiltrating people that were in opposition to things that were bad. And they were sowing distrust. They sent Dr. King a note urging him to commit suicide. And they threatened to expose wiretap recordings of an FBI staged honeypot sexual encounter. So they were blackmailing him. They also did this to the Black Panther Party leaders, false accusations and planted evidence aimed to incite violence and justify state repression. So they were really trying to trap them, put them in a bad position, and justify some kind of intervention. So this program was revealed in 1971. It started in 56, but it was revealed in 1971. So remember, MKUltra, the church committee is what ended up investigating and uncovering everything that was going on with that. This was revealed because of actually activists who broke into an FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, exposing internal documents that detailed the program's operations. So I just want to say, maybe some of the whistleblowers that we get to hear from, maybe they're plants, maybe they're fake, but we can only hope that they're real and that they are the people who are basically doing what was done in these past instances, like breaking in and revealing these documents that expose the truth. Sometimes it takes someone who's willing to fully break all the rules to kind of crack it open. And then hopefully we have enough systems in place to do the right thing. And that's what, New Paradigm Institute is not telling people to go and break into classified places and expose secrets. They're trying to work with legal systems to move things forward, but it's very hard. Last time they proposed an amendment to the NDAA, it was completely gutted and then it was shot down. So they need citizen support. It's actually important for us to take this seriously and try to help in any way that we can. But if you're somebody on the inside, do the right thing, So basically, because of this break-in, this did lead to congressional investigations. And this was the same church committee that did these investigations. And there were reforms that came out of this intended to limit intelligence agency abuses. Nevertheless, the FBI understated the scope of wrongdoing, framing COINTELPRO as an overzealous but ultimately defensive measure rather than a systematic violation of constitutional rights. So again, they're doing the same thing here, saying, a couple people were overzealous, but We were trying to protect everybody. That's our job. Bullshit. You weren't trying to protect everybody. This is a violation of constitutional rights. So this program is all about disrupting grassroots movements. That's what they were doing here. That's what they were practicing. And think about all the tactics that they have available to them now to do these things today. They control. We have the internet. We're all connected into a network that makes us that much easier to manipulate. So we do have to keep an eye on the development of our technology and what it might be doing to us. And we have to really watch how these manipulation tactics could infiltrate our daily lives, all of the things that we participate in all the time. So both phenomena exhibit a formula: identify the disruptive source, undermine its credibility, flood the public space with dismissive narratives, and secure institutional deniability once exposure occurs. Operation Mockingbird. This one is all about infiltrating the media. So this is from the 50s to the 70s again, Cold War time. And in 1976, according to the final report of the Church Committee, the CIA maintained covert relationships with several hundred journalists. So when this was investigated, they were able to say, you know what? Yes, what we've unveiled, what we've been able to find through this investigation is that the CIA had several hundred journalists and media organizations worldwide that were infiltrated by them. And they were utilizing these channels to disseminate propaganda, plant favorable narratives, favorable to U.S. foreign policy objectives, and suppress reporting deemed harmful to national security interests. So again, they decide the narrative. They infiltrate every organization that the people trust or are just used to listening to. And so that authority, that place of truth that you're going for your news is actually telling you a lie. And then they suppress any kind of independent reporting and they deem it harmful to national security interests. So they have a great excuse that works every time. So this is all about infiltration of our news systems, the systematic engineering of public discourse by intelligence agencies. Mockingbird illustrates how entire media ecosystems can be systematically shaped to marginalize disruptive knowledge. Selective media framing, ridicule of credible sources, and the prioritization of government-sanctioned narratives over independent analysis. Get it? They don't want you to be an independent thinker, and they don't want you to be an independent researcher, and they don't want you to listen to independent journalism. They want you to listen to the stuff that they have control over. In both historical and modern contexts, information is selectively curated. So both then and now, this is still happening, strategically disseminated and rhetorically framed to minimize the disruptive potential of paradigm-shifting discoveries. Minimize the disruptive potential of paradigm-shifting discoveries. It's so sad. Life could be so much cooler. It could be so exciting and interesting if we all had access to more of this truth. And then Stargate. So Stargate is the Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ program that started at SRI in the early 70s. This is all about ESP and specifically remote viewing. So this was initially funded by the CIA, and later it was transferred to the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. And this went for over 2 decades. Again, these programs are not short. They have quite a life, and there's a lot that comes out of them. And so whenever they try to tell you, oh, we didn't find anything. Oh, it was another one. Remote viewing's not that effective. Bullshit. That is not the truth. This was extremely powerful stuff that they were discovering. And it all kind of branched out and turned into different things like they do. But this program itself was over 2 decades in and of itself, and it attracted millions of dollars in government funding. And it was used during Cold War intelligence activities, suggesting a sustained, cautious institutional interest in non-conventional means of information gathering. Because you know what these remote viewers can do? They can bypass all security systems. Their consciousness can go and access information at any location. They can use their consciousness to move into the probable future and the actual past to retrieve data, and so much more. This was the tip of the psychic iceberg. And the Pentagon has denied early reports of the deployment of remote viewing. They've denied it. The Pentagon denied it, like they always do, but it's a lie. And so, again, they put out their story saying, like, this was unreliable and inconclusive. The termination of Project Stargate followed a familiar pattern observed in earlier classified research programs: selective disclosure of unfavorable results, minimization of successes, and the stigmatization of unconventional lines of inquiry. In this respect, Stargate's closure and public framing operated as a deliberate disinformation strategy to delegitimize research that posed challenges to established scientific and institutional paradigms. Remote viewing poses challenges to our understanding of the nature of reality, important challenges. We need to know about this stuff. We, individuals, have this ability and this power latent within us. Many people who are total beginners can have success at remote viewing. If there's anything you learn from going to a remote viewing workshop or starting to play with these skills, it's that we're made to do this. We're all made to do this. And that is a huge threat to the powers that be. Can you imagine if we, the people, had confidence in our own inner intelligence, if we had confidence in accessing data from the database of reality just with our mind without having to go anywhere? We would all be so dangerous in the best possible way. It would also take a lot of spiritual and psychological maturity. We would have to grow into these abilities. We would have to proceed with so much care and caution and a sense of responsibility, but it is possible, and I urge you to try it out. So both fields, so the suppression of Project Stargate, particularly remote viewing, parallels the critical treatment of UAP and NHI-related research. Both fields explore phenomena that, if validated, would require substantial revisions to existing scientific frameworks and threaten entrenched models of knowledge and power. Moreover, the themes of perception, cognition, and consciousness central to remote viewing investigations reemerge in theories regarding UAP phenomena, particularly those suggesting psychical interactions with observers or anomalous cognitive effects reported by witnesses. So all of this is a big part of the UAP stuff that we're learning about. And that's why you can trust Shock's Talks, because I've got all of this in these previous episodes. We're covering all this stuff because I'm onto them. I'm onto this pattern. I see how all of this needs to be looked at together. Suppressed science, human potential, paradigm shifting discoveries in our own capabilities, but also scientific paradigms that would change the very way we operate in reality. There's a spiritual component, a psychological and a philosophical component, and then there's the technical. And all of these things we have to wrap our heads around and understand, like, there's an intersection here of all these things that the UAP phenomena is causing us to look at. And it's so exciting and so interesting. They get into Nikola Tesla here, and basically upon his death in 1943, did you know that the US government seized his papers and personal effects under the authority of the Office of Alien Property Custodian? Again, another little act that they were able to use to their advantage, saying, this is the Office of Alien Property Custodian, and we get to seize these papers because Tesla is an alien, not like the alien, but like not US citizen, but he had a status as a naturalized American citizen. So they took advantage of that and they suppressed his work and his findings. And this is a big deal because, as we all know, this is part of the pattern of scientific suppression. this immediate seizure of disruptive research, official minimization of its significance, and long-term classification. And Tesla's work was on wireless energy transmission, scalar waves, and resonant frequency systems that parallel concepts central to modern discussions of advanced propulsion, including field manipulation and energy generation without conventional fuel sources. So again, who is this threatening? Money and power, big oil. And just recently in 2025, and the interview is great, Jesse Michaels has this interview on American Alchemy with Ambassador Harold Malmgren, a senior advisor to Presidents John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Gerald Ford. He publicly stated that he learned from foreign intelligence sources that Nikola Tesla and Thomas Townsend Brown collaborated on anti-gravitic propulsion. So this was his dying statement. This is what he wanted to say right before his death, which happens a lot. So Nikola Tesla's work, the treatment of his work, mirrors the broader phenomenon of knowledge suppression explored throughout this paper. Tesla's innovations were marginalized publicly, while quietly influencing classified efforts. So to the main people, don't worry about that. There was nothing really there. We didn't really find anything. And then in their secret programs, hoarding all the knowledge. Okay, this is gold. How can we use this to keep advancing? But nobody knows what we're doing. Gross, gross, gross. And how does this relate to UAP phenomena? High energy fields, non-conventional propulsion, and rapid acceleration without aerodynamic control surfaces. And then they talk about like the legislative mechanisms, which we've kind of touched on throughout this, but these are mechanisms for suppression and disinformation. The Atomic Energy Act of 1946, the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951, a way to kind of classify these patents that have come forward, and just how they're able to exploit these old laws, I guess, that need to be updated. So that's what all of this effort is about, is like we need to either update these acts or we need to update how they're being used, and that's what New Paradigm Institute is trying to help with. So while ostensibly protective, these laws have functioned as durable mechanisms for insulating disruptive scientific discoveries from public view without robust legislative reform and the introduction of independent, transparent oversight mechanisms. The pattern of suppressing transformative knowledge under the guise of national security will likely continue, with profound implications for scientific innovation, democratic accountability, and humanity's collective future. And then they get into the implications of this disinformation and suppression. So the US government's sustained reliance on secrecy, disinformation, and selective disclosure has yielded far-reaching consequences, extending well beyond the concealment of specific programs or discoveries. These practices have reshaped the public's relationship with institutions, impeded the open pursuit of scientific knowledge, and contributed to structural challenges for democratic governance. So they're just talking about how all this secrecy and suppression can actually block these lines of inquiry that might otherwise yield transformative breakthroughs. And they're mentioning consciousness studies again, alternative energy, and just how this is really blocking our progress. I'm trying to skim through so I can wrap this up, but I highly recommend going back and reading this whole paper. It's just so interesting to read, and looking at it yourself and reading all of it is going to really cause it to sink in. But thank you for listening to my breakdown and letting me do a little read along with you, because I'm really glad that you're here and that you care about this. It's really important. So interesting. So these warnings, separated by more than 50 years, reflect a persistent pattern. Government secrecy and disinformation do not merely withhold data, They can shape the boundaries of what the scientific community considers legitimate, thereby restricting intellectual freedom and delaying potential revolutions in knowledge. It's a crime against the soul. This is not just a human rights violation. This is a soul level violation, shaping our consciousness, blocking us from thinking for ourselves, from asking questions, from exploring reality. I can't stand it. And then the recommendations for transparency and oversight. We must modernize secrecy laws. All those acts and all those protections, we got to modernize it. They can't keep getting away with using things the way they're using them. We got to launch systematic declassification initiatives. Enforce disinformation prohibitions. Enforce. How do we do that? I don't know. Invigorate congressional oversight of the executive branch and implement statutory protections for whistleblowers. So this is what New Paradigm Institute is all about. And like I said, you can join their newsletter. You can also get involved. There's a lot of ways to participate. They talk more about this Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Disclosure Act, the UAPDA, initially proposed in Congress in 2023 by Chuck Schumer and Mike Rounds, these senators. And this was modeled on the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. So the UAPDA would create a legally binding framework for identifying, collecting, and disclosing UAP-related records held by federal agencies and affiliated contractors. The act would establish an independent UAP records review board composed of presidentially appointed, Senate-confirmed experts with the authority to review classified UAP materials and override agency classification claims unless a demonstrable national security risk is shown. So they can't just get away with saying everything is a national security risk, but if they can specifically say this part really is, then they can block those experts from reviewing it. But they've got to let a lot of it come forward for this review and oversight. It would also mandate a centralized UAP records collection, require periodic agency compliance reporting to Congress, and impose deadlines for disclosure. I like the sound of that. So they're saying reform is urgently needed. They also want Congress to pass a Classification Reform Act to overhaul the national security classification system and end its routine abuse as a tool of institutional control. I love how organized they are. They're just like, boom, these are the things you've been doing. This is how we want to get it better. This is how we want to fix it. It's so smart, and it's going to be so hard to get any of this to pass. But maybe we have a chance if we all really take it seriously. Maybe. If not, we always have a chance of exploring our own psi abilities and breaking out of all of the systems of control. So don't let that one go. That's always available to you, and you don't need a law to allow you to do that. But if you let your mind be controlled by technology and propaganda, you might be blocked from progressing in that way. So got to keep an eye on that. All right, so this is coming to an end here. They go very deep into all the things that they're trying to do. They make the point that the aim is not to assign blame to individuals, but to confront the systematic structures that have allowed secrecy to persist beyond their justifications. And the restoration of open scientific inquiry is critical. Without these reforms, the trajectory of discovery will remain shaped not by the boundaries of human imagination, but by the limits imposed by institutional secrecy. Free your mind and the rest will follow. So they're like, let your imagination run free. Let us innovate. Let us be the people that we're meant to be. Let us discover new things. Let us all advance. You know, we can't be suppressed by these institutional secrecy, evil agencies. We really got to break free. And this is the legal way to like move that needle a little bit. And the very final closing paragraph, recognizing these structures is a prerequisite to any meaningful reform. So thanks for going through this again, because now we can see what has been done and what is still going on. We can see it very clearly. The task ahead requires sustained institutional reform, robust oversight, and a reassertion of democratic principles over the management of transformative knowledge. Only through such systemic change can transparency be restored, scientific inquiry liberated, and the full potential of human discovery realized. Let's go! All right, thanks for checking out Shock's Talks, and I'll see you next time.